This saw bench, featured in issue 270 of Wood Magazine, proves incredibly handy in the shop, and you can watch our other videos showing how to use it. But here I'd like to show you a couple of different ways to make the half-lap joints. I'd like to go over a few techniques not covered in the magazine article on cutting half-lap joints. What we show is cutting them using a stacked dado at the table saw, where you're just milling away the material. If you want to cut them by hand, this section of the video is for you. No matter if I'm cutting them by machine or by hand, the first thing I'm going to do is mark out a sample joint very carefully. Doing it by machine, you only have to mark one end, maybe two, to get everything set up. If you're doing it by hand, you have to mark every single end that you want to cut, because you need some guidance for where to cut. So these are all actually cut in with knife lines. This line was done with a marking gauge. The base line around was done with a knife and a square. And to darken them in, I just took a very sharp pencil and lightly ran it down in that knife line so you can see where it's cutting. So we're trying to make this joint. I cut this one off camera just so we'd have one to start from. And the first thing you might notice about this guy is the end is not square. So this is stock that I was cutting earlier in the video at the saw bench. I've machined it down to 1.5 inches thick by 2 inches wide. And now we can start cutting the joinery. If you're doing this on the table saw that I'll show next, you should go through and square up the ends. But you don't necessarily have to do that with hand tools. So instead of having a workpiece that's 19 inches overall, perfectly dimensioned, you can go a little bit over. And what I've done here is I've measured 1.5 inches down from the shortest corner. So this might be, 1 3/4 inches. This is 1.5 inches. One of the hardest things I think to do with hand tools is to square off the ends, especially of thicker stock. And if I'm just going to cut this piece away anyway, why take my time planing that off? So that's what I've done with this one. This one wasn't such an extreme example, but you can see this part of the end is still rough from a 9 TPI handsaw when I cross-cut the stock initially. And I've cut away this, so let's cut away the next section. So for this particular one, again, we're going to cut away the higher corner, the higher angle, so I have left to shave off. So what we're going to do here is stand it up in the vise. And for this part of the operation, I'm using a back saw. You could certainly do it with a hand saw, but a back saw typically is a little finer toothed, and the backing on it prevents your saw from wobbling in the cut. So you should get more true cuts. Or straighter cuts. They might not go to the line, but they'll be straighter. So what I've done is just scored across the end grain here to delineate where I want to be on that line. Now I can see the line on the front, so I'm going to start angling the saw down as we cut. I can't see the back side, but I've cut to the line on the side I can see. So now comes the time where I'm going to flip this around and cut to this line. So initially on this, you could angle this down. Because I have this curve started on the back side, I'm just going to go straight down. And trust that my saw is tracking down that line. Let's check if I got to the base. Almost there. I could hold this in the vise. For cross-cutting the shoulder of this half lap, I like to use just a simple bench hook. And I'm trying to cut as close and as clean to that line as I can. There we go. And now you will have a little bit of cleanup. I've done a pretty good job here. And you can actually see on that face, let's see if I can get in the light a little better. You can see on that face this kind of angled line from where my two cuts were when I was cutting this vertically. So when this was standing up, the angled line is my initial cut, then I turned it around, finished it off. So I'm just going off my gauge lines here. Use a nice flat wide chisel. To bring that face down. Typically, when I'm paring the end grain, I'm going to stand this up in a vise. Check my knife lines. And you can kind of hear where the high spots are as we pare this down. So this is, you're trimming down to your line based on sight and a little bit of feel, but you can actually hear it too. Before I go too far on this, let's double check our fit. So this is the joint we're trying to bring together. And as I'm doing this by hand, what I would typically do is clamp them together, look for gaps, see how everything is fitting, see how the shoulders are pulling together. And I might have to get this closer. This is what I was alluding to earlier, where I could spend time planing away that material or cutting it in the first place. But really what I'm after is a nice tight joint between these two. Once they get glued together, I can just take a block plane and smooth those little high spots out. No problem at all. So that's doing it by hand. By hand, you really don't need that much equipment. It's just going to take you more time to lay out and more time to fit. But if that's what you have, that's what you have. Next, let's do a table saw bandsaw combination. Okay, let's cut a half lap using a table saw bandsaw combination. For setting this up, I was very careful to do my layout lines just like I was doing by hand. The catch is I only have to do 1 or 2 boards maybe to get my setup right, and then after that it's just letting the machine do the work. So initially when I was setting this up, here's the sample I was after. Initially when I was setting this up, I have my lines scribed all the way around. This is actually the operation we're doing at this machine. We're just going to clip the shoulder. If I wanted to just do everything at the table saw and I didn't have a dado stack, and I just wanted to do a single blade, I'd make that shoulder cut and then just keep nibbling an 1/8 inch at a time until all that material is gone. This particular blade does not have a raker, so it's just alternating cross-cut teeth. So it would leave a series of V-shaped notches all the way across that I'd have to clean up with a chisel. And that's why I'm going to make my cheat cut at the bandsaw, so I don't have to do any cleanup there. So setting this up, I used my scribe lines to set my blade height. So I'm going right off the blade to figure out how high I need that blade. Then for setting it for distance from the fence, I'm not going off a measurement off my scale. I'm actually lining it up on a tooth, bringing the fence up to that scribe line, and that's where I need to be. Something quirky about my saw, and I think a lot of saws have this problem, the fence isn't always perfectly square. So this particular fence leans to my left. So when I push my workpiece up, the very top edge of the workpiece is touching the fence, but the bottom of the workpiece is in air. So that is one thing to think about when setting up your machinery to do joints, or even doing normal work like ripping. If I have a 3/4 inch board and a 1.5 inch thick board, and I'm setting it at the, if I don't even move the fence, I'm going to get different results when it comes out the other end, because the 3/4 inch board is going to ride lower, the 1.5 inch board is going to ride taller or higher on the fence. So for this particular cut, once we have it set up, you can really mass produce them in a hurry, because all you're doing is making repetitive cuts and the machine does the work. So that's the table saw. Hardest part is setting the thing up. Now that we're done with that, let's go over to the bandsaw. And now for our cheat cut at the bandsaw. I have my fence set up. Again, I was going off my marked out knife lines that I've penciled in. So now it's just a matter of running the pieces through. And there we have our half lap. See how tight we are. Actually, that's pretty good. I don't have hardly any trimming at all. Hopefully we didn't go too far off the deep end on making, you know, what aren't that complicated of a joint. But I just, again, wanted to give you some options for what I think is kind of a useful project that, you know, whether you're a hand tool woodworker or a power tool woodworker, or, you know, a little bit of both, something in between, will be very useful. See you next time. Again, thanks for watching.